Welcome back to the Comic Book Historian Podcast with Alex Grant and Jim Thompson. Today we have a very special guest, Joe Staton. Born in North Carolina, grew up in Tennessee, and graduated from Murray State University in 1970. He's been a professional comic artist since the 1970s and beyond, now working on the Dick Tracy comic strip. We have the detective comic artist, Joe Staton. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Hi, Joe. I'm a big fan, and I'm looking forward to this a lot. And I know you're originally from North Carolina, but you moved to Tennessee. How old were you when you moved?
Well, I was I don't know. I was back and forth in Tennessee. Mostly in Tennessee. Grew up born in North Carolina at Air Force Base. So we got back to Tennessee, and then I grew up in West Tennessee. So that's my part of the world.
So your father was in the military?
Yeah, the Air Force, Polk Air Force Base is where I basically hailed from, and starting comics. They always had comics around, and I was always reading the newspaper strips. And as you know, I go back to Dell Westerns and Dick Tracy and the Phantom from the strips, and I just go way back when.
Now, were you reading comic books too, or just what was in the newspapers?
I was reading comic books a lot. There, like I said, I started, I guess, with the Dell Westerns, the Lone Ranger. I remember the Lone Ranger a lot. Roy Rogers. I was reading a lot of those actually before I knew much about superheroes.
And then were you starting to draw them? I know when I was a kid, I was always copying pages out of the books and things. Were you doing copying at an early age?
Oh yeah, the family story is that I don't remember if it was age 3 or 4, but I was found in the middle of the kitchen floor trying to trace Dick Tracy and the Phantom from the daily strips.
Oh, that's awesome.
So trying to be a comics guy, I go back at least till 3 or 4. So
wow.
Before that, I don't know.
So tell us the story about at age 12 how Julius Schwartz is partly responsible for you getting into comics. I love that story.
Julie, I guess that would be when I was realized that Julie was publishing letters of comment. Is that story?
Yes.
And I started sending letters, had letters to Green Lantern, Justice League, and Julie actually printed a few of my letters. I wrote a letter to the Justice League, like commenting on everybody who was in the Justice League, and I remember. I said Green Lantern was a rotten Robin Hood, and Julie edited my letter to say he was a second-rate Robin Hood. So,
wow.
So my contacts with the world of comics is being edited right off the bat.
By Julius Schwartz. That's awesome.
From that, your address was published in those letter columns, and then you got connected to fanzines and science fiction fandom because of that, correct?
Exactly. It's funny. The Bill Plott, who's a science fiction fan in Opelika, Alabama, sent me his fanzine, Maelstrom. And that was the first I knew of the world of science fiction comics fandom. And so I kind of went from contacts with Bill to Southern fandom, Southern SFPA, Southern Fandom Press Association.
Yeah.
Started doing my own fanzines. Now the kind of funny connection there is that Bill Plott contacted me on Facebook. So I am back in contact with Bill after all these years. So everybody's still around. It's doing.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Now,
so I on Bill on his fanzine now.
Now, is this science fiction comics or science fiction like Ray Bradbury and other writers?
Yeah, it was mostly writers, mostly novels.
Novels, yeah.
Yeah, I was a big Philip K. Dick fan, that sort of thing. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And had you read the Wally Wood EC comics, or was that a little bit before your time?
That was a little bit before my time. I didn't really get exposed to those till a bit later.
And you were exposed, though, to some comic professionals during this phase, right? Like you had some contact with Dan Adkins.
Oh yeah, Danny was kind of my contact to certainly the whole Wally Wood circle, and he was always willing. He was always kind of kind of a depressing guy, but but that was kind of his persona. But he was always willing to answer questions and just give me tips. And he was also when I came to New York, I stayed with Steve Stiles in Brooklyn, and Steve was a good friend of Danny, so we kept up the contact there.
So you're saying Dan Adkins was a kind of a depressing guy?
Well, that was kind of his persona. He always wanted to tell you just how awful it was trying to make a living, and how hard it was to just keep going. But I think he was just kind of keeping I guess a realistic attitude on things.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you were involved with SFPA, but you also interconnected with other regional science fiction groups as well, like the LAS FAS in Los Angeles, and also a New York one. Was there a real sense of community back then about this?
Yeah. Well, there were, I guess, in SFPA, the Southern group, there were members from outside the area from LA. So Bruce Pells and people like that. So I was in contact with the LA groups, and Lynn Bayless and Arnie Katz were in the New York groups, and they were still part of SFPA. Like I guess they were associate members, or I don't know, expat members. I don't know, but yeah, but they were part of SFPA, and I had lots of good contacts in New York, especially in Brooklyn, so that I had those contacts to fall back on when I came to New York.
So let's talk about that for a few minutes, because I'm curious about that. You moved to New York after graduation from Murray State.
Right.
What was your intent in moving? What were you trying to do? Trying to work for Marvel in DC?
Yeah, that was my intent. I was going to give it a shot. Basically, that's what I always wanted to do, was to draw comics, and I'm not sure if I actually believed I'd make a go of it, but I figured I would feel awful if I didn't give it a try. So
what was your major in college?
I was an art major.
Art major. Okay.
Yeah, I guess mostly more art history, but a lot of studio art, and minor in journalism. So. Yeah, I'm still in contact with other art majors from Murray, so we're still all around.
Mm-hmm. And were you at this point, as a graduate, were you studying other comic book artists? Were there ones that were influencing your developing style?
Oh yeah, I was kind of always studying everybody, and I was always a great Steve Ditko fan, and certainly Chester Gould and Flash Gordon. I was, Bernie Wrightson was coming around in those days, and with his easy style, and So yeah, I was kind of following everybody.
And then in 1971, or I'm not sure if it was 70 or 71, your future wife joins you in New York, correct? Can you talk about her a little bit? When you met her? I know it was her in college at a program, but I want to hear, because y'all have been together an awfully long time, and that's great. I'm a divorce lawyer, by the way, so I especially appreciate it.
Yes, I always introduce Hillary as my first wife. But we were on a program called World Campus Afloat, where a kind of recommissioned cruise ship went around the world and stopped in various ports, and we had college classes all the time on the ship, and excursions in port. So we were in the part with Europe, hit a bit of Africa, came around South America, where I managed to spill a Pepsi on the leading socialist artist in Uruguay, things like that. But you got to meet all kinds of people. And actually, I met Hillary's roommate early in the cruise, and didn't really make contact with Hillary till pretty much toward the end. And we were various people in the classes were giving like guest talks, and we were both in an art history class, and I gave a talk on comics, obviously. So of course Hillary likes to remind everybody that she asked a question about animation, which I couldn't answer. So she embarrassed me first time I had public dealings with her, and we went from there. And it keeps on going.
And she decided to move to New York as well to start her career.
Yeah, fortunately, Ronald Reagan she was from California, and she was going to be a special ed teacher in California. But Ronald Reagan had come into office and was in the process of destroying the California educational system, so that there weren't any jobs for her. But she had relatives on Long Island, and she set up some interviews back east, and she came out to check that out. And I hoped part of her motivation, she was coming to check me out. So we wound up back together in New York.
Oh, that's awesome.
And by the time you got married, you were becoming disheartened about your potential in the comics industry, and you were actually thinking about going back to school to study museum restorations. Is that right?
You have done your research.
Yes.
Yeah, I had actually enrolled at Hunter. They had a museum restoration program, but when we got married in April.
Oh, I know. And then I'm going to go transfer to Alex to talk about your honeymoon, because that's one of the best stories ever. So that the day after you get married, you're off to your honeymoon, and you only have enough money to go to Connecticut.
Right.
And Alex, take it away.
Yeah. So and I remember we spoke at the LA Comic-Con recently about this. And so you had just gotten married, and you drove to Kirby, Connecticut, over to Charlton. Is that right?
To Derby, Connecticut.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. We were just headed to Mystic in Connecticut for kind of overnight out of town, and I had taken samples up to Marvel and DC, and hadn't made any progress. And Charlton, which was you recall, Charlton was the bottom of the barrel in comics, but bad printing, not much pay. But they were on the way, and they were comics. So we decided, let's give it a try. I'll take in my samples on the way. And actually, Hillary went in with me. George Wildman, well, the editor said I was the only one who ever came looking for work with his wife. So we went in. They were very nice to us then, and I left with an assignment, a ghost story. So I was actually in comics at that point.
So you mentioned George Wildman. Who did you meet in that meeting that you spoke to that led to you being hired?
Well, Sal Gentili was still the main editor then, and George was his assistant. So I think George was kind of my good luck there. So George kind of poked Sal and says, this one might work. And so Sal retired not too long after that and headed to Florida. So George was still the main editor then.
And then did they know? Did you show them any of your fanzine art as part of that, or did you just kind of meet them and through verbal conversation? You got the assignment.
Well, I had some ghost story samples that I had done.
There you go.
I had done two stories, I think, for Warren, but that never led to anything else. So I don't particularly count that as a start. But I still had samples from that.
Oh, from your Warren stuff. Okay.
Yeah, I still had those samples, and they thought it matched with their ghost stories, their horror books, just fine. So they gave me a Joe Gill script, and I was
Joe Gill.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to ask is who wrote that script, and because you did a lot of short stories, you did anthology romance, horror titles, and was Joe Gill the main script writer that you had worked with in the beginning, and did you meet Joe Gill?
Oh yeah, Joe was quite a character. He was like their go-to guy for writing everything. Joe would just come into the office and sit down and start writing, and he'd write, I don't know, 5 or 6 short, sometimes horror stories, sometimes war stories, a lot of romances, and by the end of the day, Joe wasn't quite sure what he'd written, but he'd have a stack of script, and he'd be, pass them out. So,
that's awesome! Like a force of nature.
He was. Yes.
He was, huh? So when you say he was a character, like, what did he joke around a lot, or was what do you mean by that?
I kind of always describe Joe as being like the embodiment of Popeye. He was kind of a grouchy, gruff sort of guy, but had a real sense of humor, and if you keep the Jim Beam away from him, he could just keep going writing. Joe was like a kind of an old time newspaper sort of guy. I don't think he did newspapers, but he was like a pulp writer. He'd sit down and just write.
Oh, that's awesome! At his typewriter, huh? That's cool.
Yep.
So now you mentioned the Warren story. I think you might be talking about the story that you did for Creepy 42 in 1971. So how did did you meet Jim Warren? How did you get that job there? That assignment?
That was Billy Graham was the editor then. I did meet Jim. I never quite got a handle on what to do with Jim, and the office at that time, they didn't really have a waiting room or anything, so you kind of had to wait around downstairs until it was time to come up and talk to Jim. So I never quite got a handle on what to do with Warren. So I did. I don't know what I do. I did at least one story that was published, and another one I think that was published later after they closed down the company. It was published somewhere else. But so I did a couple of stories for Warren.
And that was when they were in Pennsylvania when you saw them there, when you met them?
They were in the city.
Oh, they were in New York at the time. Okay. So then your first regular series for Charlton was Primus. Is that right?
Yep.
So tell us what Primus was for people who haven't read it.
Primus was a syndicated story about skin divers. It was put together by Ivan Tors, who had produced Sea Hunt. So it starred Robert Brown, and it had some stuff about spies and adventure, and sometimes it was done really cheap, but but it was fun, and I would go around to like boat yards and such place, try to do get reference for boats and skin divers, and I got a lot of reference on fish. We had some good stories about barracudas. Joe Gill was writing it. Yeah, and actually, Joe did a pretty good job.
So, it ran for about 7 issues. It was a short-lived TV show, though. Is that right? It didn't last very long.
It didn't last long. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then, do you know on your end, did Joe get like plots from the TV people and then he came up with the stories, or would he have to kind of generate the stories on his own for that?
He had, I guess, their Bible, who the characters were.
Yeah, there you go.
But certainly you just give that to Joe and he sits down and suddenly there's a couple of books worth of Primus scripts.
Yeah, that's awesome. He sounds like an interesting fella. So you were there at the same time as Pat Boyette, Jim Aparo, Steve Ditko. Did you get to know any of them while you were at Charlton?
Well, I kind of came after the big move of a lot of the guys moved with Dick Giordano to DC.
DC, yeah. In the late 60s, yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of Jim Aparo left with Dick, but I certainly met Ditko and Pete Parisi and those guys. So
Pete Parisi, yeah. So how was meeting Ditko, and under what circumstance was that?
It was just at the office, and he would he liked what I did. He was nice to me. I was really in awe of him. And I met him again when he was at DC later. So he was always very nice to me. So
was he kind of quiet?
He was kind of quiet, but he could always come up with something to do at Charlton. He did a lot of his own writing. He got a lot of the scripts from Joe Gill, and so yeah.
So now,
Alex, did you know that Morrissey was that he was a cop? Had you heard that?
I think, I think I did hear about that before. Yes,
Joe,
but only in passing.
You can verify that, right? He was a police officer.
That in fact is one of the first things I found out about Charlton when we went in that first day, and Sal Gentili was still the editor, and
Sal Gentili
talking about who worked there, and they says, "Oh, now Pete is a New York cop, and they have they were telling me this like up front. They have these moonlighting rules. You can't take other work while you're a New York cop. So that's why this stuff was signed PAM.
Oh, that's cool.
So he was kind of, I guess it was an open secret, but he was moonlighting kind of on the fly there. And, that was one of the first things I learned about Charlton.
Yeah, was him as a cop. So then with Charlton, so was it mostly just mailing your stuff in, or were you kind of going to the offices a lot?
I didn't go up to the offices a lot. Mostly it was mailing stuff in, and that was before Federal Express, so that was kind of iffy. But I would go up to the office, a few times, and hang out.
Right, sure. So then, now tell us. Now you co-created E-Man with Nick Cuti, who recently passed away, and that was in 1973. You guys did a lot of work together.
We did.
And that was, yeah, you and Nick, right? Yeah. And you guys did initially a 10-issue run. First, when that book came out, tell us about the origins of E-Man. I read a bit from him, from a trade that he had written about the origin a little bit, that there was initially the idea that he would be some factory worker that was caught in some experiment, some accident, and that you specifically didn't like the idea about that and wanted to make it something a little more interesting. Tell us about the co-creation of E-Man.
Well, like you said, I did a lot with Nick, and Nick had come on as the assistant editor working for George, and was doing a lot of writing of the short stories on his own. And I did a lot of Nick's horror stories, and his stuff was different from Joe's, from Joe Gill's, that was kind of humane and had a lot of humor. As we hit it off. We liked working together. And at one point there was some, I guess, Dick Giordano had the Action Heroes, had tried a line of heroes, and there was some talk of Nick starting a line, but the management kind of stopped that, but they let Nick go ahead with his E-Man character. And because I had worked well with Nick, he called me up and wanted to know if I'd be interested in working on that. And like you said, we came up with a different origin, and it worked out well.
Yeah, I love the origin because I was reading over it last night. I love the art in it, first of all, and the humor in the text is fun too, because you have Nova Kane, who is an exotic dancer trying to pay her way through college.
Right.
And then I really like the origin of this energy manifestation that gains consciousness and then starts kind of figuring out what he is and interacting with humans. It's a real unique idea. Were you first? So it went for 10 issues. Were you sad to see that the book was canceled? Did you enjoy doing it?
I loved doing it, and I was sad when it was shut down so quickly. Nick had plenty more ideas to keep going, but it really didn't sell at all well. So
and it surprises me because it is really fun. It's really got everything a lot of people like about comics in it. So maybe it was a distribution issue or something. I'm not sure. But now, did you think at the time that was the end of the character and you just basically had to move on to other projects? Did you think, okay, well, that's it for E-Man?
That is what I thought at the time. I really didn't have any idea that there would be other possibilities.
Joe, I just want to add that I was 13 at the time, and I got to say, Nova Kane was a big thing for me.
Yeah.
You're not the only guy I've met who was about 13 at the time who really liked Nova.
It spoke to me, that's for sure.
Yeah. She's a foxy character. I mean,
it's brought to my attention that there's a shot of Nova in an Egyptian a milk bath, I think, with slaves, and that seems to have had a good reception.
I remember that to this day. It's in my head.
So now, and then you and Nick co-created another character that a lot of people love, the detective Michael Mauser, and what a funny character that is, and even some of the dialogue between him and Nova Kane is fun, and the way he's depicted with, kind of a bit corrupt just from years of being a detective, with kind of the gruffled kind of face, and there's a fly hanging around him a lot. Tell us about that character and how that came about.
Well, Nick certainly liked Mausers. He actually had a Mauser at one point. And a lot of guys who hung out with Wally Wood had guns, and
oh, that's funny.
So that was kind of the origin of the name. but the look, Nick originally called for him to look like Arnold Stang. Nick was a great admirer of Arnold Stang and his voice. But this was before Google, so I couldn't quickly find any pictures of Arnold Stang, but I had pictures of Dustin Hoffman. Papillon was out. So everywhere you looked, there were these ads for Papillon, and that's was my original look for Mauser. I based it on Dustin Hoffman there.
Yeah, that's right.
So Nick thought Nova, being a decent person, but pretty tough in her way, going up against Mauser, who is, he's not really corrupt, but he understands the ways of the world.
Right.
And E-Man coming from outer space is still very innocent. Yeah. So we had the conflict of Mauser and Nova as to who brings E-Man into the world. Yes. Is he corrupted, or is he just exposed to reality, or is he still just a sweet guy who doesn't get a handle on how the corruption of the world is?
Yeah, because there's this one funny line where she's like, "Well, I just think he's kind of a bad person." And he's like, "Oh, he's not bad. Look, me and him think you're a real nice, or you're a real sweet broad." Or something, and then she was like, I don't know if I like this friendship or something like that. It's really fun stuff. So talking about Nick Cuti, he was actually really good friend to our Facebook group. He would always chime in when there were questions about Wally Wood or whatever project he had worked on. What would you like to say about Nick Cuti? You guys were good friends.
Oh yeah, we stayed buddies, kind of right to the end, and we would get back together over the years. That E-Man would pop up from another small publisher or something, and we'd do something new. And he had a character, Captain Cosmos, and we did a few issues of Captain Cosmos self-published to kind of keep the idea out there. So. But Nick was, was just a great guy. He was, the thing was, you have so many writers coming along in the last few years who think you have to have 6 issues or to tell a story. And let Nick alone, and he could tell a perfectly good story in 6 pages or 18 pages or 1 page. And so he just loved comics. He loved telling stories, and he was a really sweet guy, but he's comes from a long line of Sicilians, so he would sometimes try to sound tough, but he wasn't very good at it. And he always would call up and say, "Hey, Giuseppe," and so and I would go, "Hey, Paisan." So we were buddies for a long time. We just
awesome.
Yeah.
And so now, around the time of E-Man, you started working with Gil Kane. How did that come to be?
I was at home. We had moved upstate by then, and I got a call out of the blue from Gill, and he occasionally used assistants and guys who help him with the layouts and stuff. And he says, "Hey, you want to work for me?" And I says, "Oh yeah, sure." And so I started doing layouts for Gill. Did that for a while. I learned a lot, paying real close attention to how Gill broke down pages, told stories, that sort of thing.
Oh, that's awesome. So what was he like to work for? He was a big influence on Howard Chaykin as well. So would you say he was an influence on you?
Oh, yeah. And I think there are similarities in how Howard and I break pages down that can be traced back to Gill. And
that's interesting.
Yeah. I think if you follow the way things move around on the page, you can see similarities in what we do. I went over, we went over to see Gill just a couple of times over in Connecticut. So I didn't work, closely with him, but I worked through the mail, and yeah. So
that's awesome. So then, and then would you guys have phone conversations? Like, would he give you feedback, things like that?
yeah,
You would.
Yeah. And of course, I always mention that Gil died owing me money, and I'm not the only one, but it was one of those things you accepted to work with Gil.
Right. And I think I hear that just about in comics industry in general back then. It just seems like there's a lot of debt there. Now, I've read that you worked on a French comic project of his called Jason Drum that looked a lot like the Black Mark work he'd done shortly before. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's basically, you've covered what I could tell you. It was a French project, kind of fantasy, barbarian sort of thing, but with a lot of space stuff. And for years, I did a lot of layouts for him on it, and I had no idea if it was ever published or what happened to it. But a few years ago, somebody, I guess from France, actually published reprinted it in the States, or wrote about it to prove that it actually existed and that it was at some point published. So.
Oh, in France, I see. So it wasn't intended for a French audience, but it did end up getting printed out there just to show that it was out. Just to show that it existed.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the details of that was.
About the intent was, yeah. Okay. So then now you also did Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch with Tom DeFalco, is that right?
Yeah, at Charlton.
Charlton.
Yeah.
So how did that come about? And did you guys meet in person? Was that by phone call? How did that all happen?
Golly, I don't even remember. I don't remember meeting Tom till we were both at DC and working on Superboy. Mm-hmm. But I must have met him at Charlton before then. So it was just something that came up, and I guess George wanted to, give me a shot at it, and it was always my mother's favorite book that I had done, and every few years she'd ask me if I was ever going to do any more books about the cute little cars. But,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And you also worked on other licensed cartoon properties like Scooby-Doo around this time. So this is before the later Scooby-Doo, right?
No, I never worked on Scooby at Charlton.
Oh, okay.
I just worked on Scooby at
just like in the year 2000 or so.
Yeah.
Okay.
You did a lot of other cartoon properties though at Charlton, right? Jetsons?
No. I must have done other cartoon stuff there, but Wheelie is what comes to mind.
That's the one that comes to mind. Now, then you also did live action licensed properties like $6 Million Man, Space 1999, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So was that first, who would write the pieces that you'd get to draw? Was that Joe Gill also, or who would do those?
Sometimes it was Joe, sometimes it was Nick. Remember Nick wrote some good $6 Million Man stuff. He had a feel for that.
Mm-hmm. Now, would you watch the TV shows just to kind of get the likeness correct, or did you draw them a little more generically? How did that happen?
Well, the producers gave us some reference, some photos, and we did the best we could to see the TV shows, and sometimes I guess it was Space 1999. Hillary would set up a camera and actually shoot off the TV screen, trying to catch better reference, because we were always short of reference.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
I had read a story that you, at one point on $6 Million Man, had to check into a hotel to watch it because you did not have a functioning television, or you couldn't get reception. Is that true?
Yeah, we lived way out in the woods up at the Catskills, so we checked into a motel that could actually get it. So that was how we were getting the reference.
Now, you also did some beautiful painted covers for Charlton. Were those fun to do?
They were fun to do. That about Pat Boyette down in Texas had found a color separator who could put the accepts for the printing for painted material very cheaply.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought it to Charlton, and Charlton was willing to let us, Don Newton, John Byrne, and Pat, let us do painted covers as long as we didn't expect to be paid more than we would for just a regular cover.
Okay.
Well, that's what we were doing. And it was a lot of fun.
It was fun, yeah. And what would happen to the original once you turned it in? Was it pretty much gone at that point? Would you get it back?
We never got them back. There are still some around. I think, Nick would salvage some, and I think Don Newton got some back. But I don't think I ever got any of the painted covers back.
Okay, so we're going to move to Marvel. It's running sort of simultaneously with Charlton, but you finally got some work at Marvel through and was that through Roy Thomas?
That was through Roy. Yeah, I had taken samples around to Marvel, a few times while I was still at Charlton, and one day Roy called up. This is how I get things. People call up out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
Roy called up out of the blue, and he introduced himself, told me a lot about himself, and asked me if I would like to start inking the Avengers. And I says, "Oh yeah, that sounds good." And I kind of cornered Roy a couple of years ago at the Heroes Con and asked him, why did he call me out of the blue like that? And he says, "Gee, Joe, I don't remember. We must have been desperate." So that was how I got to work at Marvel. Roy couldn't think of anything else to do.
Now, had you already been at Marvel and they didn't know it? Were you doing anything for Gil Kane that was getting published?
Yeah, I did quite a bit of stuff for Gill. Some of it would be published pretty much as I did it. Some Gill would redraw a bunch. There's one issue of Spider-Man that's entirely my work except for one arm that Gill redrew. And Ghost Rider. So yeah, things like Ghost Rider that Gill wasn't particularly interested in. He would just have me do my Gill impersonations, and he'd turn them in. So yeah.
When Roy hired you, you didn't say, "Well, I'm already working for you. You just don't know it."
I did not think to say that.
Okay, I want to talk. You primarily, when you were at Marvel during this period, you were primarily being used as an inker, correct? Not a penciler.
Mostly, it was almost entirely inking the Avengers and then the Hulk. So, I did some black and white work for Archie Goodwin for the black and white magazines, but so that was penciling. But mostly I was doing inking there.
I had read somewhere that you said that Archie Goodwin was your favorite editor you ever worked with. Is that true?
It's very likely. Archie was kind of my patron saint. He would keep an eye out for me and kind of send things my way and figure projects that other people wouldn't think I'd be good for. He'd think that I could do them, and so. Yeah, I'm not the only person who's like that. That Archie just had that kind of presence in the world.
Oh no, we get it from almost every single person we've ever had on the podcast. That's one of the two common. A lot of the common comments are, "We love Archie Goodwin," and a lot of them say, "And we don't love Gil Kane." Those are so you've covered the two.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
All right, so I want to talk about. I know you did some black and white magazine stuff, but I remember you as the anchor, especially your two runs on the Hulk, both with Herbe Trimpe and with Sal Buscema. Talk about those a little bit. How it was working on runs of that character with two different artists, and what your thoughts were at the time.
Well, I got onto the Hulk. I was inking the Avengers perfectly happily with Sal, and then one day a package of Hulk art showed up, and I called Len Wein was the editor, and I called Len, and Len says, "Oh yeah, we thought you'd be good on the Hulk, so we switched you." So nobody told me that I was doing a different book. So I was suddenly inking Herbe Trimpe, and that worked well. It seemed we matched okay, and I tried to pick up things from Herbe's style so that it didn't clash. And then I guess Herbe just finally decided he'd had enough Hulk, and then Sal's Hulk was showing up, and I tried to keep a little of Herbe's style in the transition into Sal. So it was different. They were different approaches to the art, and I guess Herbe was more idiosyncratic than Sal. Sal was more generic Marvel style, and Herbe really wanted to be Jack Davis. He let Herbe alone. That's what he would do. So he had to discipline himself to do the Marvel style, but he did it fine. So
I never knew what to make of him as a Hulk fan, because there would be these beautiful John Severin pages, and then you would get Jack Abel or something, and it was like looking at a different artist in a lot of ways. And they were both interesting, but so different. And yours seemed like you captured what Trimpe was doing without any putting your own on it as much, which I enjoyed. When it came to Sal Buscema, though, like I recognized you in it a lot more. Was that deliberate?
No, I was trying to follow the each penciler as best I could. And both, I got finished pencils from Herbe more often, and I got layouts from Sal.
There you go. Well,
Yeah.
that would be the reason there. Yeah, and I do know what you mean about that Jack Davis. I've seen some Herbe Trimpe faces in the Hulk, like on some military personnel that look like Jack Davis faces. Yeah. I remember seeing that. And then in the 90s, remember Jim, he did like that Image look for a little while too.
Oh yeah.
So he could kind of change a bit. All right.
Now, were there artists at Marvel that sought you out, that wanted you to be their inker, or were there artists at Marvel that you really wanted to ink, or that you never got to ink and you would have liked to have?
Well, I always wanted to ink Gill, but I never got the chance. And other than that, I was assigned to either Sal or Herbe, and that's who I was inking.
So then, as far as Charlton, so there was the Charlton Bullseye fanzine from 75 to 76. What work did you do with that Charlton Bullseye fanzine?
Well, there were some E-Man stories that hadn't been finished up for the comic when it shut down. So they being finished in the fanzine.
Right.
We had a reprint a few years ago of the early E-Man stuff. So the material that wound up in the fanzine was actually printed in color for the first time in that section.
So then the CPL gang was a group of comic fans who published the fanzine, the Contemporary Pictorial Literature, CPL, in the mid-70s, and it was founded by Roger Stern, Bob Layton. The CPL gang included Duffy Voland, a young John Byrne, Roger Slifer. All these guys, they all became all these people all became comic professionals by the end of the 70s. Did you have much association with them?
A little bit, for the fanzine, and So they saw early John Byrne stuff, and yeah, I guess saw Duffy around New York a few times when he came out. And, and Slife, yeah. So the guys were around.
The guys were around, and then I saw also in Charlton Bullseye fanzine issue 3, there's a fun black and white panel picture of you, Nick Cuti, Roger Stern, and Bob Layton, and it says on the side, and you're talking to two people from the audience, and it says on the side, picture taken by Hillary Staton. Do you remember that?
I'm not sure of the specific picture, but Hillary took a lot of photos back then. Yeah, so that would have been from the early Kahns, and so yeah, and she took one of the at DC when Chris Reeve got a Hugo at the Worldcon in England. Hillary took pictures of Chris Reeve getting the award because DC hadn't thought to have somebody take pictures. So whatever pictures they put out of that event, those were Hillary's photos.
Oh, yeah. So so she probably has kept kind of a photo journal of your career. Is that right?
Not keeping it in order, but there are random shots here and there.
Yeah, because a lot of the artists that are kind of the stag artists, kind of single, a lot of them just don't have any pictures, at all. But I mean, you probably have more around than they would, because she was there kind of helping you out in a lot of the times.
Yeah, and she was a good photographer, and kind of in the pre-digital days, and now she is still a digital photographer.
Oh, that's awesome.
We have proof sheets around the house of who knows what. There are pictures of Nick Cuti from the old Suling shows, and it goes back away.
So then, now how did you get set up with Mike Friedrich's Star Reach? You were in issue 7 in '76. How'd that happen?
I had been doing a self-published. Well, I wasn't self-publishing. Johnny Oxiger was doing the Gods of Mount Olympus, and I was doing that for him. And when he shut down, there were some issues of that left, and that's that. He found a possibility with Mike Friedrichs to print them there. So that was really my only dealings with him.
So it was basically just finishing off that canceled Charlton story. Yeah,
and then John Workman finished up the Gods of Mount Olympus.
There you go. And then Tom Warzachowski lettered some of that stuff as well. So now, was that a Canadian project, or because and there was a paper shortage here, so that opened up your time to do it? Like, how did all that turn out?
Yeah, there was a shortage. We got that was still at Charlton, and we had got a note from. I guess from George one day, and says, "These are dark days. There's nothing left to print on." So all the printing paper, the newsprint was cut off for a while. So you just kind of scrambled around, and Johnny contacted me, and there was time to do other projects, and eventually the paper supply came back, and I went back to whatever I was doing.
Cool.
You enjoyed that, though, right? The mythology of that. I've read interviews where you said that you were really happy with that work, the Gods of Mount Olympus.
Yeah, I really enjoyed doing it. Yeah, it was definitely something different.
Has that ever been reprinted where it's accessible for our listeners today?
I don't think it's ever been reprinted at all. Every once in a while, I only have like one set of the original run, and a couple of those are because somebody at a con found them for me. At one point, I had a nice bound set, but I don't know what happened to them. and certainly they've never been reprinted.
Okay, so you in 1976 or so, you finally got some work at DC. Specifically, Paul Levitz brought you in to do some inking on Karate Kid over Rick Estrada's pencils. Is that right?
That's right, and it's like everything else. I got a call out of the blue from Paul. It's amazing to think how young he must have been at those days, and he wanted to know if I'd like to do some work for DC, and I was a little stifled at Marvel. I thought at the time, with just getting mostly inking, and so I was I guess willing to do some finishes for DC.
And you quickly, DC actually relatively quickly let you start doing pencils,
right,
as well. And when you started doing pencils, Joe, it seemed like you were being given assignments that were like fan favorites, but not necessarily the big heroes. You were doing Metal Men, and then you got to revitalize Doom Patrol over in Showcase, and then its own title, right?
Right. And a lot of that I was doing my own pencils and my own inks. So, which was a real attraction at the time, because that's what I'd been doing at Charlton.
Now, were those comics that you had followed when you were younger? Did you have any attachment to those characters?
Well, I definitely had an attachment to the Metal Men, because I was a big fan of Andrew and Esposito. I loved what they did. I really didn't know much about the Doom Patrol. That was just because Paul Kupperberg and I were kind of in the office with Paul Levitz one day, and he says, "We're doing the Doom Patrol. You want to do that?" And I kind of said, "What's that?" And we did it. So it was kind of lucid those days. If you were in the office, you wound up doing something.
And then at some point, you were moved up to the to bigger heroes. You did Superboy, but you also did Wonder Woman, and this is in the late 70s, and you got to do Green Lantern, which must have been exciting for you because of the Gil Kane connection.
All right, and I was a big Green Lantern fan ever since Green Lantern had come back on Showcase. So I'd been kind of putting my name in for Green Lantern whenever there would be a chance, and eventually Jack Harris was the editor, and Jack and I were buddies, and he put me in to take over Green Lantern.
And that run you were doing with Roy Thomas some and Marv Wolfman some. Is that correct?
No, never with Roy.
He got some credits for it, but it's story credits, I guess.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that, or I lost it. But I started at the very end of Denny O'Neill's run. I did the story where Green Lantern and Green Arrow broke up. They weren't traveling buddies anymore. And then after that, it was I had a run with Marv Wolfman. So that was my first time out on Green Lantern.
Now, was this after Mike Grell he'd been doing some Green Lantern, Green Arrow? Was that before you?
Yeah, Grell was before me, and Alex Saviuk had been immediately before me, and Alex went off to draw Spider-Man.
And this was a kind of a hit. People liked your Green Lantern quite a bit, didn't they?
Yeah, actually, my Green Lantern had a good reception. Still does. People seem to like it. It gets reprinted a lot.
Now, was Guy Gardner brought in during that run, or was he brought in during the Steve Englehart run with you? That was done later.
That is strictly with Steve Englehart. That
okay.
Guy had been pretty much written out of the continuities, and Dick Giordano apparently specifically asked Steve to reimagine Guy to do something that the character wouldn't be lost. And Steve brought in a completely rethought version of Guy.
And it took comics by storm. People loved that character at that point, and you were strongly identified with that character, even to the point of doing limited series and prestige format things and other work involving Guy, right?
Yeah, I figure Guy is one of my characters, so yeah, I'm always pleased to be identified with him. He's not a role model, but he's he's interesting.
So, talking about your characters, let's talk about when you were also given the Justice Society characters that had been revitalized with Wally Wood and All Star. And then from that, you played a hand in making both. You did the Power Girl series for Showcase.
Right.
The first time she had her own was leading in a story, and you were totally part of the creation of the Huntress, correct?
Correct. I'm co-creator on 2 different versions of the Huntress. So yeah.
So talk about that and your love for the Justice Society, because I know that was at that time, that was one of your things that you were really enjoying doing.
Yeah, I really liked the whole Justice Society thing, and it worked that I was coming in following Wally Wood, because it gave the Earth 2 projects look a little different from the regular DC universe, and that's what I was trying to keep going. So I had followed. Fortunately, DC had been doing a lot of the 100-page reprint books, and for the last few years, and I'd really gotten interested in all the characters from the 40s and who would then be in Earth 2, especially like the Flash and Wildcat and those guys. So yeah, it really fit me. I tell people I'm always most at home on Earth 2.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, you wrote one, but you didn't write. You drew one of my favorite Earth 2 stories ever done, which was that Brave and Bold 197 that Alan Brenner wrote with Batman and Catwoman. I'm skipping ahead to that. That's in 1983, but I love that story so much. When you saw that script, did you realize, wow, this is a really, really good piece?
I didn't. I did not realize just how good it was until after it was done, and I was very impressed with how it all turned out. And George Freeman had just really great inking, and Alan Brenner. I talk about how Nick Cuti had like a feeling for the humanity of his characters, and Alan Brenner, that's his strength. He could take a superhero characters, and it was like they were real people. They had feelings, they had relationships, and I think this is maybe one of the very best of that sort of story. I was really pleased with it. I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, it holds up really, really well. It's one of my favorites. And your work was great in it. If you didn't realize, subconsciously you must have, because you really upped the game. It's a beautifully illustrated piece.
Well, thank you. And it was that whole trying to get the 40s look, the Earth 2 look, and I had a chance with All Star to kind of develop how I handle those characters, and it just kind of all came together there.
How much work did you do on Legion of Superheroes? You did at least a short run on that as well. Did you enjoy that at all?
I never really got a good grip on the Legion. It wasn't a series that I had followed, so I was kind of trying to figure out who everybody was and what all these costumes were, and so I never gave the Legion a good run. I didn't get into the Legion the way I should have. But there are stories in there that I think worked well, and I always liked the character of Mon-El, and Paul Levitz's stories about Princess Projectra and Karate Kid, and so there were some good stories there, but I never quite gave it the interest I should have. One of these days, in a different reality, I'll go back and, Paul and I will do a nice Legion story.
Mm-hmm.
I remember your block, and I thought, well, that's a good block. I like that, but it wasn't your Justice Society. That's for sure. That there was a passion there that you could see.
So Joe, tell us first how you got hooked up with First Comics, and well, what year was that? Was that 81 or what exact year was that?
Oh golly, asking me dates is never good, but I think it was 1980. I think
straight up 1980. Okay, so how did that connection happen?
Well, Mike Gold had been brought in as PR guy, information guy at DC, and he was out from Chicago and had connections with theater groups out there. Mm-hmm. And one thing led to another for those connections to be putting together a new comics company in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And I was, getting to feeling a little stifled at DC at that point, mm-hmm. And Mike asked me would I like to come out to Chicago and be art director and do a book for a new company out there. Mm-hmm. And it was the time when, there were Eclipse Comics and I don't know, various smaller publishers were starting in those days.
Yeah, because of the direct market was starting to take hold, and there were a lot of independent comics companies, and then a lot of comic stores everywhere. So it was a boom economically. So okay, so then Mike Gold set you up with, and you became art director at First Comics. So
right.
What did that entail, being art director there?
A little bit of everything. We a lot of dealing with the printers, trying to keep various freelancers online, and things with the printers. Like we were still printing at Sparta in Illinois, and I would fly into St. Louis and rent a car and go out into a cornfield where there was this many acres of a building where all the printing was done, and it was an adventure. So just figuring out how everything in comics was done, and there was a point at first where I think I could honestly say that I was the only person who could do every step in the production of a comic book, from generating an idea to helping unload the trucks out to the store, all of which I'd done. Mm-hmm. I'm now a master of many obsolete technologies.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because we had Eric Larson on the show also, and you guys were both at that LA Comic-Con. And what's interesting is he says the same thing. Mike Gold hooked him up with a lot of work, and that he also can kind of from beginning to end put a comic together. So that's a fascinating connection that you guys have. So then you also had E-Man revived at First Comics. So what was that? How did that get set up there?
Well, eventually, everybody, all the people signed up to do books for First were generating their own new characters, and I was working on a new character. I was kind of a Midwestern superhero, mm-hmm. And Mike Gold says, "Why are you trying to do this? We already have a pre-sold character, so mm-hmm. Why don't we just do E-Man?" Mm-hmm. So it was actually Mike Gold walked into my office one day and says, "Oh, let's do that."
Yeah.
So then they got to work getting the rights from Charlton and doing a lot of copyright work, and so that's why we did E-Man.
Uh-huh. And then did you, as a creator of E-Man or co-creator of E-Man, were there any royalty issues that had to be worked out during any of this? How did that, or rights to the character? How did that exactly work?
Well, First Comics line, there was a copyright lawyer in Chicago by the name of George Bullwinkle,
Uh-huh.
who somehow got all the rights to E-Man straightened out. And the deal was that First would front paying for E-Man all the expense to to get everything from Charlton, but that my royalties from E-Man would go to cover what they paid. So we had that deal.
Mm-hmm. And then did the rights eventually to E-Man, like who then after all that, who owns E-Man at this point?
Well, it's kind of a thing that is split between me and a guy named Ken Levin, who's the lawyer who was involved at
First Comics.
First. So Nick and I could keep on doing new E-Man material, but controls all the media rights to E-Man. So if there's ever a E-Man movie, it'll have to be dealt with by Ken.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. It's kind of cool knowing about that stuff. So then it ran for about 25 issues. It went from 83 to 85 as far as cover dates and cover year. And then Martin Pascal wrote most of the first 8 or so issues. And how did you feel he was as a writer on the character compared to Nick?
Well, Marty is another of my buddies, but he and Nick had a different approach. They're different guys. Had a more explicitly satirical take, and Nick what didn't deliberately parody things as much. So, it was a different take, and really, E-Man is certainly at home mostly when Nick is doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now you also wrote for the character a little bit as well before Nick started writing him, right? Again. So tell us about writing E-Man.
Well, actually, I'm credited in several issues of E-Man, but the process there was I would go into the office with 3 or 4 ideas, and with whoever was in the office that day, like Rick Oliver, the assistant editor, was there, and Bruce Patterson, and I don't know, various. We kind of sit around and figure out an idea we could do the next issue, and I would draw something up, and actually Hillary, there she goes again, would do a lot of the dialogue. So it was just kind of everything was put under my name because I was identified there with.
Oh, that's cool. So she did a lot of the actual scripting of that.
She did, yeah.
Yeah, she's definitely has a lot of trades that she's able to kind of make things happen.
Yeah, she's very clever. Yes.
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, I had that impression when I met both of you together that she's kind of like really organizing a lot of things at the same time. So then okay, so you were art director at First Comics from 80 to 83, but you kept doing E-Man even past that, right? Because those dates are from 83 to 85. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of those issues were while you were not the art director, right?
Right. But at that point, Nick had come back and was available to be writing the scripts again. And certainly that was something I wanted to be around for. But I kind of burned out as on staff at first, being a full-time art director and a full-time artist and several other things at the same time. Kind of got to be a little bit too much.
So you were excited at that point to just go back to doing art again.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. You were ready to go back to that. So now were you interacting with guys like Mike Grell, Chaykin, Starlin around this time?
Yeah. Well, Yeah, certainly with. I was dealing with all those guys there because they were doing the books, and I'd have to talk to them if something needed adjusting, or Howard, you've forgotten to draw Flag's hip over here. Would you? Fortunately, they're generally a pretty good group. I really enjoyed working with Howard. Howard's my hero. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So, and we've had him on the show. Fun guy to talk to, and that's interesting that you both have the Gil Kane lineage. So when you were seeing pages from him with his American flag, which I think is highly critically regarded as being in a similar status as the Frank Miller Batman and Alan Moore Watchmen, that he kind of brought that serious storytelling in the 80s. Did you feel like you and Howard had kind of a more of a special bond than maybe with some of the other people you'd talk to?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly with the Gil Kane background and, just the approach. And, Howard came out and talked to us at first. We had real nice meetings with Howard and Mike Gold and, the whole crew when Howard was talking about what he was going to be doing with Flag. Mm-hmm. And, I think that the name American Flag came out of one of those meetings. So. Mm-hmm.
Oh, really? How fun.
Yeah. Those were great comics, Joe. Sable, the Dreadstar, those were all really fun to read. How did it go bad?
Basically, the company was underfunded, and we never were able to sell the advertising we hoped to cover the difference. And basically, we were just underfunded and couldn't keep going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now you also did a story with Marty Pascal for Eclipse's Destroyer Duck 1 called Gimme My Check. Scott Shaw did the inks. I remember I made a post about this, and there have been different renditions of this Alex Toth, Julius Schwartz story of Alex not getting his check, throwing him out a window, or threatening to, then he got fired. Now, looking back on that artwork, that's interesting in that the person that looks like, that I think represents Toth, kind of looks like Toth. He's got the Pierre hat too, which is kind of funny because there's that artist personality that Toth has. Kind of
have that cap.
Yeah, that kind of difficult artist. But then there is the Schwartz character, which actually looks more like Robert Kanigher.
It was my understanding it was Kanigher.
I see. So when you did it, you thought it was actually Kanigher in that story. Is that right?
That's the story I was told.
Yeah, I got you. That's why you drew him like Kanigher, because you actually thought it was Kanigher. Okay. That's cool. Yeah, because I made a post about that a couple years back, and I think that whole concept of an editor not paying the artist throwing him out the window. I feel like even when Jim and I have interviewed some people, they would say, "Oh yeah, I think," and it was completely different editors and artists saying, "Oh, I think that artist threw this editor out the window," when it probably didn't happen. But it's such a piece of the folklore of this comics history. What do you think about this story? Why does it resonate so much with a lot of people, that satire, that relationship between artist and editor?
Well, it's one of those stories. If it didn't happen, it should have.
Yeah.
That the people with the money need to be thrown out windows occasionally.
That's awesome.
Let's talk about a few things in terms of that. You did the Millennium series and then New Guardians came from that. What was it like doing that? Because that was somewhat controversial, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I was involved in the controversy, just in getting it done, but I was in terms of getting the book done, I guess weekly or whatever it was, and the book was being rewritten daily, and I was not originally assigned to do the book. I just kind of was thrown into it, and so and I know Steve Englehart had a lot of political material he wanted to get into the book that DC at the last minute wouldn't allow him to. It was amazing that the book got done at all. So I got it in.
Speaking of Englehart, let's talk about his run on Green Lantern. Now, what was he like to work with? Did you enjoy working on Englehart scripts?
I did very much. I think I've said a couple of times that Steve was not the best writer I ever worked with, but he was definitely the most fun. So I never knew where he was going. The stories would just go off in a whole different direction than I was expecting. If you give me a Marv Wolfman Green Lantern script, it's going to be very well written and right. No problem writing. But after the first couple of pages, I know how it's going to end. But with Steve, I never knew, and I never knew where he was going, what was going to be in the next issue at all, because he was always coming. He kind of had more ideas going on than he could get organized in like any rational reason. So it was fun trying to keep up with what he was doing.
So it was kind of a surprise when you would turn a page and he had aged the Arisa to being a fully grown woman instead of a girl, and they're starting dating all of a sudden. That had to be a shocker, wasn't it?
That was a complete surprise to me. Yes, right. So
did you think at all? I don't know about this one.
I may have had a few hesitations, but I was having so much fun just trying to keep up with them that it's not like I would say, oh, maybe we should stop and think about this. No, that never occurred to me. I'm not going to claim that I tried to rein him in or anything. No, I just tried to keep up.
And with the Guardians, that was several of those characters were new characters. And were you instrumental in their concepts, in their creation with Englehart? Characters like Chip, obviously, and Arisa, although I think she'd been around a little bit. Was
Saltback a Mike Barr character from a miniseries from a few years. Yeah. So well, I obviously designed a lot of the characters, but I don't think I had real input onto what the thinking was.
Did you design Kilowog?
I did. Yeah.
He's got to be one of the most beloved ones you draw, the concept of it. You must get a lot of feedback on Kilowog, don't you?
Yeah, well, Kilowog is one of those that everybody loves.
Yeah.
I'm more likely to have people ask for drawings of Kilowog than shows than hardly anything else.
Oh, that's cool.
That makes sense to me, because as soon as I saw him on the page, it's like, well, you just love him. And Englehart knew how to write him, and the catchphrases with the poser and everything. He was just a perfect character.
Yeah, I think so. And Steve just gave me a very general outline and said, this is it's a big guy, so we gotta big and lovable. So we go with that.
And that was a pretty long run you did with Englehart on Green Lantern, wasn't it?
I think it was. Yeah.
Were there other DC books? You did. You later did a Batman Superman Adventures book that you got an Eisner for, correct?
Right. Yeah. I really like working in that animated style. I did. I never had a run on any of the animated books, but I had a lot of one-shots and fill-ins, Batman Adventures, and a lot of that. I really like that style. It worked very well in that Superman Batman.
Now, were you using sort of a Bruce Timm Paul Dini model, or did you harken back to Alex Toth as well?
Mostly the current Bruce Timm look. That's but I'm always trying to go back to Alex Toth whenever possible. So and his Super Friend stuff. yeah, but I really like drawing that style.
Were there any other books or projects you did at DC during your run there that you really enjoyed doing? I know you did a pretty long run on Superboy. You did a run on Wonder Woman at some point, which I guess did you use the Ross Andru model when you were looking at Wonder Woman, when you were doing Wonder Woman?
I think not. I probably should have, but I was trying. I think Ross's style on Wonder Woman wasn't really what they were going for by that time. So I guess I was shooting more for a Dick Giordano look on Wonder Woman. I was kind of at an in between style for Wonder Woman. She wasn't the Andrew. She wasn't George Perez. I was just kind of in there keeping her going. But you talk about things that I like to mention that I do, that I did a one-shot Citizen Wayne. Was who wrote that? Mark Waid, I think.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was an alternate reality Elseworlds Batman. And I had an amazing inking job from Horacio Ottolini in Argentina. It was like a pulp magazine all the way through. And I'm really proud of that book. And there was a book about attempting to ban landmines. Suffer the Children, I think was the title. That was written by Denny O'Neil, and Bill Sienkiewicz did beautiful inking. And those are two books. It's funny. I'm not really that identified with a run on Batman, but I've done standalone Batman material that I think's probably some of my best.
Uh-huh.
What about Plastic Man? You were doing that with that was in Adventure Comics. Was that intimidating to try to do follow Jack Cole in anything?
Well, Jack Cole is one of those guys I can't help but follow. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's like I can't help but draw in an animated style. I can't help but draw like Jack Cole, as much as I fight it. So yeah, I loved doing the Jack Cole stuff. And speaking of working with Marty Pascal, Marty had some of the goofiest villains for Plastic Man. My favorite was Brickface. There used to be an ad on TV all the time for some kind of Adobe process where you could have things stuck to the outside of your house and they would draw bricks on it. And that was Brickface, and that's where that villain came from. So, yeah, those were cool. I like doing
that. That was a fun series, and this is not DC, but we don't have it anywhere else. I want to mention that you were actually inking ElfQuest at one point too for the pennies, correct?
I did. I inked a miniseries, Siege at Blue Mountain.
And when was that?
Oh golly. When was that? Maybe in the 90s? I don't know. Somewhere in there. I've lost track.
And were you bringing a Wally Wood flavor to it, or what were you doing with it?
Well, I was trying to be faithful to Wendy,
Yeah.
And Wally Wood look really did seem to work well with Wally Wood's blacks and Wendy's cartoon characters and everything cartoon but solid, like they were real. So that was Wendy, that was Wally Wood, that was me. So I think it worked out pretty well.
You enjoyed that project too?
I did. I enjoyed it a lot.
I liked that a lot. I thought it was a good matchup of people. It worked for sure. Let me ask you a question about DC editorial during the fairly long period you were there. Did you have relationships with With Levitz, obviously, he brought you on board when he was very junior there, but rose to the top. Jenette, Kahn, Infantino, anybody what were your relationships with the publisher and people in charge?
Well, obviously, with Paul Levitz, and he's still a good buddy. So we one of those things that lasts forever. And but when I came in, Carmine was still there, and I don't know. I guess Paul had started, but was mostly with Carmine. And I used to think it was a Julius Schwartz took my samples into Carmine, and Carmine says, "Oh, I don't need to see these. I know what Wally Wood can do." So I took that as a compliment. So,
oh, cool, yeah.
But I never really had any direct dealings with Jenette. I'd see her occasionally and say hello. And I guess Dick Giordano was, the highest. Other than Paul, I would deal with Dick. And just the regular editors then. So
did you and Dick have any was there like a mutually acknowledged Charlton connection, even though you guys are there at different times?
Actually, I don't think so. I never quite. I mean, most everybody clicked very well with Dick, but I never quite was on the same wavelength. He always thought my I guess he thought my stuff was too Charlton-y, a little too goofy for what he was looking for. But we worked fine. But I don't think we ever saw exactly what we were doing as being the similar. Yeah.
Right. And how about Joe Orlando or Saul Harrison? Any contact with those guys?
Well, Saul was still around. He didn't. He left not too much after I started. And Saul, I'm told Saul didn't actually think I should be working, but I never did at that personal.
Oh no. Okay.
So but I managed to survive Saul. And Joe Orlando was one of those guys who was one of my partisans. And Joe was a little bit like Archie. He would get me into things that he would think I should be doing.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So at one point, Joe had me do a job for Mad, and when the Power Girl book was, I think that was with Joe, and we. Huntress, Joe worked on design with us. So yeah, Joe and I were buddies.
Now, just so I know, have you guys mentioned Gaspar Saladino at all?
No.
Okay. Just a quick question. Yeah. So, well, Gaspar lettered over you quite a bit. Did you have any contact with him? Did you have any? Did you like his lettering? Do you have a tendency to like one person's lettering more than another's?
I don't think I've ever met Gaspar, but I certainly really liked his lettering a lot. And at first, I always loved Ken Brusinak's lettering. He lettered American Flag and did. He was, his lettering was an amazing part of the art. So he's a designer as well. So. Lettering's important.
Yeah. So now, before we get to Dick Tracy, you did some other crime strips prior to that assignment. In the early 90s, you did Mickey Spillane's Mike Danger Sunday strip with Max Allen Collins. What was that like?
It was fun. That was Chris Mills was an editor at, what was that, Techno? They were putting it together. And so, it was as close to Dick Tracy as I thought I was ever going to get.
Are you a fan of Mickey Spillane?
Not specifically. I'm more of a fan of Raymond Chandler. And,
there you go. Me too.
More Dashiell Hammett. More.
There you go. Uh-huh.
More sophisticated versions of the detectives.
Yeah. Steranko, we had him on the show. He's a big fan of Chandler, which obviously we know that because he did a Chandler graphic novel. But so now, and actually, he told me that he stood in front of Raymond Chandler's house and took a picture in front of his house. He was that big of a fan of Chandler, it was like, take a picture, ma'am, in front of Raymond Chandler's house. So that's a fun story. So, okay, so those are your favorite crime writers. Did you ever look at Dashiell Hammett and Alex Raymond's Secret Agent X9? Did you ever check those out?
Oh yeah, I love that stuff.
Okay, so do you enjoy crime comics in general?
Yeah, I actually, given my druthers, I think I would do crime comics rather than anything else.
Rather than anything else, yeah, because you were a sci-fi fan just in general, and then you've done quite a bit of superhero stuff. But it seems like you have a lot of fun with the crime comics.
I do, yeah. I go back to Mr. District Attorney, so I like the crime stuff.
That's cool. Does that involve like crime TV shows and things like that too?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So then, now this is the most successful crime solver character of all time. You also did Scooby-Doo. Is and that's funny. So you did about 100 issues of Scooby-Doo starting in 2000. How did that come about?
Well, I had been doing, what was I doing before that? I guess Guy Gardner. And I lost Guy. Guy was being changed, and I was walking down the hall, and Marty Pascal was the head of special projects, and they were taking care of the Scooby-Doo books, and Bronwyn Taggart was the editor. And Marty says, "Hey, you want to do a couple of Scooby-Doo issues?" And I, started working with Bronwyn, and I loved Bronwyn, so she understood my humor, and we hit it off. And everybody was kind of doing a Scooby-Doo issue here and there. Then she said, "This is too much trouble. Why don't you just do the book?" And that happened. So I wound up drawing Scooby-Doo for 13 years.
Yeah, that's huge.
I was perfectly happy just with Scooby and the Mystery Machine and the whole thing.
How fun. So then, because you can do cartoon pretty well.
Yeah.
And I guess that explains why you like Plastic Man, in that he's kind of a mixture, but he's kind of a cartoon character at the same time as the superhero genre. So that's kind of an interesting.
Yeah, so Plastic Man is kind of a basic for E-Man. So it all comes together.
Yeah, because E-Man can manipulate his body and do all sorts of weird things with it as well. So that makes sense. That's a funny connection there. So then now you also did a crime strip called Femme Noir. What was that about?
That was with Chris Mills, his own character. And our original idea of what Femme Noir was that she was going to be a female version of the Spirit. She wore like a blue raincoat, and another character in a hat. I like drawing hats. And Chris was developing a whole city to surround her, and some of these were, just very traditional pulp type horror. Well, actually, some of them was horror, some was science fiction, but it was all in a crime tradition. So we maybe one of these days we'll do some more Femme Noir. I really like that character.
Mm-hmm. So now in 2011, you took over the art on the Dick Tracy strip. Was that a dream come true for you?
It was one of those things that I'd always been wanting to do. I'd always tried out for Tracy, and it just kind of fell into place because Mike Curtis and I, great Tracy fans, and at the time, it was kind of generally understood you could do like tribute versions of copyright characters, and there'd be no trouble as long as you weren't really infringing. I've since learned this is not true. You can be sent away for doing this. And we were sending it to the Trib, and the Trib was realizing that we were doing our own Dick Tracy strip online, just for fun. And at that point, Dick Loker, who'd been doing the strip for a very long time, finally decided to retire. And they said, well, there are these guys who we should have sent to jail. Why don't we just hire them? So that's how that came. They called Mike and says, you guys want to take over the strip? And he says, well, I'll ask Joe. And, yeah, we'll do it. So,
how fun.
Yeah. It's either people call out of the blue with things, or things just fall into place. Things I try to do, don't quite work, but things that just fall in, those turn out pretty good.
Yeah. So then, did you go back and read some of the 1930s Chester Gould stuff as well, or had you already done that?
I'd read a lot of it. At this point, Mike has actually read all of it, but the IDW reprints, they send them to the Trim sends them to us. So we have good reference. We can go checking back. We bring back a lot of the old characters, do a lot of our own, but a lot of the old characters. And yeah, so it's a tradition. We're keeping it going.
Mm-hmm. Oh, how fun! And you actually received Harvey Awards for Dick Tracy for 3 years, 2013, 2014, 2015. So you're receiving a lot of critical as well as fan praise. How does that feel? Were you surprised to get your first Harvey Award for that? What was your thinking on this?
We were surprised. Yeah, we're very, very pleased to see that, that something we'd always wanted to do is being appreciated. So, yeah, we're surprised, and we're very happy that it's getting a good reception.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the free samples you're giving out at the convention, and I was really impressed because it feels like it's continuing that Chester Gould vibe. So you're really kind of summoning this force here. So how long do you want to stay on the strip?
It depends on the weekend, on the week. Sometimes I'll figure I'll be around till Tracy's 100. Sometimes I figure I'll be around till the end of the week. So yeah, I can't give you a definite answer there. Depends on how tired I am at the moment.
Nice.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work for sure. All right, Jim.
Okay, just a couple of random closing questions and things. I'm going to assume when I ask you who your favorite collaborator was that you're going to say your wife, because the two of you do comics together, things for the hospital, children's hospitals and things like that. Tell us about that a little bit, because that's awesome.
Well, the Boston Children's Hospital, it turns out that the head of gastroenterology is a Scooby-Doo fan, and his son was very young at the time, and he was buying him Scooby-Doo comics, and he sent a letter to DC. A Scooby fan draw a letter, and I sent him a drawing, and we talked a bit, compared notes, and as a comics fan, he had always wanted to use comics to explain diseases and dealing with hospitals and things like that. And he realized when he found out that I could draw this, and my wife Hillary is a writer. He realized he'd found his team, and our first book was about Crohn's and colitis, and we dealt with the national group and went to camps for kids with the diseases, and so we did all kinds of research, and it worked out well. We actually did a book about a little kid who's has Crohn's and how he deals with the whole thing, and we did a couple more books after that. And we're actually doing another one at the moment. So it turned out well. You never know when you're going to find a comics fan in a useful position. Yeah,
that's great. You took a hiatus from Dick Tracy a couple of years ago. Was that when you were working on the Ayn Rand Anthem book, or was that not connected?
That the Ayn Rand was before that.
Before that. Okay.
I took a.
And how did that come into being? That seems like an odd project for you.
It is, but I occasionally work with Charlie Santino, who's a packager and a writer, and it was Charlie, put it all together, and I'm also a fan of Classics Illustrated. I really first did classics. I did Christmas Carol, and so it's not that I was that interested in the philosophy or anything, but it was a book to be adapted to become a comic, and so that's how I got into it. And some of Ayn Rand's science in it needs to be explained. So Charlie did more designs of how the electrical stuff is actually done. So.
Oh, wow.
So it was fun. We did it as a YA romance. It's about two cute kids who want to go out in the woods and start their own civilization. So it was fun. I think it was definitely fun.
And what did you do during your hiatus? Why did you take the time off?
From Tracy?
Yeah.
Well, occasionally I'll just want a break, and we'll get somebody to do a minute mystery, which there's a tradition of short mysteries in the Dick Tracy comic books from Harvey from the 50s and 60s. So Rick Burchett did a really great one, Charles Ettinger. So it's fun to see how different people will handle Tracy without having to turn the strip over to somebody else. So it gives a break, and it lets us see what other people would do.
And Rick Burchett, he was an inker for you on when first did the E-Man.
That's right. Yeah,
I remember that because he was a good match with you. Who were inkers that you thought that you enjoyed seeing their inks on your work?
Well, obviously Rick and Bill Sienkiewicz, Horacio Ottolini, Bruce Patterson. I always liked Bruce's inks on Green Lantern. It's been several good ones.
Well, Joe, for me, this has been a real pleasure. You're a favorite of mine, and I wanted to thank you. I'm going to turn you over to Alex to close out.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe. It seems from career you've been a fan of comics from the beginning. You set out to do it, and what it looks like is just through patience and hard work, you've managed to hit all sorts of aspects of the comic industry, hitting up all sorts of characters, creating new characters, co-creating new characters, even having production experience. Looking back, it's a huge career, and we're excited to see more of your work. And it seems like sometimes some artists, they kind of peter out, but you just keep going. And I'm just really impressed. You're just this really hardworking creative dynamo. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.